Okay, we'll go back on the record. Points from the parties are noted and well taken. We will examine options and make an announcement later today. And so with that, we need to figure out the next issue. Who exactly is representing the Republican legislative intervenors for justice? Yeah, please do.
I represent the Republican Legislative Intervenors for Justice, and Ms. Ryan has been assisting us during these hearings.
Okay. So who will be doing redirect, tendering the witness?
I believe Mr. Thomson will be doing that for himself.
Okay, so we're going to treat this as self-represented.
Yep.
Thank you. That is appreciated. Okay. All right, thank you for that clarification. Representative, go ahead and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to provide is true and accurate?
I do.
Thank you. Do you have any corrections to your testimony?
No, I do not.
Okay. If asked the same questions today, would you provide substantially the same answers?
Yes.
All right. Would you like to move admission of your pre-filed testimony and exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Are there objections? Seeing no objections, the board will admit, give the way due. The board will now allow parties to conduct their cross-examination. Once the parties finish, the board may ask you questions if it has any. Upon conclusion of the cross-examination, you will be allowed to clarify any answers you were asked on cross-examination. This is not the time to begin a new line of questioning or add to testimony. So with that,
may I just thank the board for accommodating my request to reschedule due to the death of my father.
Of
That
course,
was very, very kind of you. Thank you for the accommodation.
condolences on the loss of your father.
Thank you.
With that, we will tender the witness to the parties. Mr. Taylor?
Thank you. Representative Thomson, I'm Wally Taylor. I represent the Sierra Club. And in your written testimony, it appeared that your primary concern was with due process and the way the board has conducted these proceedings. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, but underlining primary because I have many other concerns as well.
Okay. I guess I didn't see the other concerns in your testimony. What are they?
Well, I'm not sure they were raised directly in my testimony, but the way you phrased the question, it sounded like those were my only concerns.
Okay.
I believe other people have raised concerns in a much more articulate fashion than I am able.
Okay. In your testimony, you referred to rumors of backroom deals and that the fix is in. What did you mean by that? And give us some background on that.
Well, it's been speculated in the press. It was speculated earlier this morning that in the colloquy over the scheduling that this was a done deal or something like that. I'm not saying that that is the case at all. What I'm saying is that it's dangerous to have these suggestions of impropriety swirling around, especially where a constitutional right is concerned, and one is strong as central to our way of life as eminent domain. The protections that are there are very important. They should be observed. And I think it weakens the entire process when we have unanswered questions involving propriety of actors and whether people have been allowed to testify and so forth.
You also said in your written testimony that the board's orders are replete with errors. Can you elaborate on what errors you think are in those orders?
Objection.
State the objection.
Calls for legal conclusion.
Well, he's a lawyer.
Well, he is, and actually, I mean, in the interest of cooperation, we did not object to the pre-filed testimony, but the testimony is effectively more a legal brief than a presentation of facts. It is one person, albeit a representative's view of what the law is or how it should be interpreted. There will certainly be briefs, likely including one for RLIJ, and the board has its own legal staff. But there really shouldn't be much to cross-examine here because it is predominantly a legal argument about the nature of due process and the terms of 479B, as opposed to facts based on firsthand knowledge of the relevant facts. And to the extent that the question is, what are the errors in the board's order, that is purely a legal question.
Mr. Taylor?
What? Well, he is a lawyer, and I'm asking what facts he's relying on to make that statement.
It's also why expert witnesses are not allowed to generally testify as to the ultimate question in a case. The fact that he's a lawyer doesn't change that. In fact, it actually makes the point of my objection.
Mr. Taylor, can you rephrase the question?
What facts do you have that lead you to say that the board's orders are replete with errors?
Same objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Taylor?
I'm asking what facts he has. I'm not asking for an opinion, I'm asking for facts.
If I remember correctly, the sites were directly in his testimony?
Some were. I'm asking if there's any others.
You're asking him to expand on the... Okay. Can you limit the question, please?
What facts, aside from any facts you put in your written testimony, are the basis for your statement that the board's orders are replete with errors?
The written testimony was referring to errors that were referenced in the written testimony. So I think I'd be violating the spirit of where the board would order me to stop testifying if I were to answer your question.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to state all the facts. You also said in your written testimony that, or you indicated that perhaps the board has not given due consideration to local governments. Can you give us the facts on which you based that statement?
Yes. My reference there is to the situation in Charles City, Iowa, where the local government, both county and city, and a public-private partnership, the Charles City Area Development Corporation, have spent, I think you could say, over 30 years trying to develop a very important pre-certified industrial park, the value of which will be largely, if not entirely, destroyed by being crossed by the proposed pipeline. So the point I was trying to make in the written testimony is that where local government is speaking with some force as an expression of the population there, that is relevant to the considerations that the board is to take into account for making its determinations on public necessity.
Thank you. Is there anything the board has done since you filed your written testimony that affirms or changes the points you made in your written testimony?
Yes.
Can you explain what those are?
Well, there have been a number of actions by the board and surrounding the board, is the only way I know how to phrase it, that suggests that Summit Pipeline has had an undue influence on the conduct of these hearings. For example, the controversy over the entity that was providing security, the controversy over whether there was any ex parte communications. The controversies like that are, in my view, very dangerous to the continuing perception that there is undue influence by Summit on the conduct of these proceedings.
Okay. What ex parte communications were you talking about?
There's been a suggestion in the record that scheduling was done to accommodate Summit.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Mr. Jorde.
Thank you. In regards to the Charles City project, are you aware of any reason why Summit either A, chose the route to go directly through the development park, or why they couldn't simply just go around it?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Do you know of any reason, knowing Charles City, understanding the development park, understanding the geography and the city's long-term plans of why there couldn't be a reroute?
No, I don't understand that. I understand your question, but I don't understand why it cannot be rerouted.
Okay, very good. And do you have any indication of whether or not there seemed to be a suggestion, I believe it was by Mr. Powell or someone by Summit, that perhaps they were in talks with Charles City of maybe purchasing that land or doing some type of negotiation on it? Have you heard anything like that?
Yes, I've heard that they, in fact, I know that Summit representatives were meeting with different people around Charles City to try to obtain an easement. But as far as outright purchase, I don't believe I'm privy to that.
Okay, all right. And in fact, the gentleman from the Development Corp, I believe, stated that he wasn't aware of anything like that, so it hasn't come to your knowledge at any time.
That's correct. And just to elaborate a bit on that, I don't think it's possible to exaggerate the amount of work that has gone into creating that development and the years of building toward it that have happened. Charles City had a huge economic catastrophe, really, in the closing of White Farm. Thousands of highly paid jobs just disappeared virtually overnight. The city still has not fully recovered from it. And the hope is that park, which is beautifully located for its purposes, would help to finally put Charles City back on the right track.
Do you believe that there is a cloud over these proceedings based upon how they've been initiated and how they've continued on?
Yes.
And do you believe that's dangerous for how the public views this process and the integrity of this body to make such important decisions, such as citing hazardous pipelines and giving or not giving eminent domain powers?
Absolutely. It impugns not only the board, but it impugns all levels of state government. And I think as a result there will be some reform efforts in the General Assembly, speaking for myself.
And you make that last portion of that answer based upon your role as an elected official?
Yes.
And were you involved in, or had any role in prior efforts of eminent domain reform in the Iowa legislature?
Well, not before this session because I wasn't in the Iowa legislature.
Okay, but in terms of any type of advising or in your role as counsel or on the periphery, anything like that?
Well, as a citizen, yes.
Okay, very good. And then you intend to continue on with those efforts now as an elected official?
Yes. I'm concerned whenever the government has delegated powers of one of the branches in a way that important constitutional rights are being decided by unelected officials. And I think that there's a tendency of all levels of government to try to expand their jurisdiction over time. And the effect of that is to diminish the rights of the people. And one of the roles of the General Assembly is to safeguard those rights. So I think the time may have come to re-examine the jurisdiction of non-electeds over things such as eminent domain, and to perhaps, though I'm sure will not be a popular process, move some of that back into the hands of the General Assembly itself.
And in your consultation with colleagues, can you confidently state that that's not just an opinion shared by yourself and that's a widely held opinion?
I'm not sure I could use the word widely held because I haven't spoken to 100 members of the House or 50 members of the Senate. However, I think I can safely say that based on the vote on House File 565, that a supermajority of the members of the House are deeply concerned about this and see the need for reform. And I know that quite a few members of the Republican caucus are concerned specifically about the powers of eminent domain that reside currently within the IUB.
Would you agree that this board here could simply deny eminent domain for all parcels on this proposed project?
I believe they have that authority, yes.
Yes. And do you believe that that's a sound decision?
State the objection.
Calls for legal conclusion.
Mr. Jorde, do you have a response?
Well, I didn't ask him as a lawyer, I asked him as an individual, if he shares that belief.
Again, I don't think it matters what capacity, it's the nature of the question, whether he thinks that a certain action by the board would be sound under a particular statutory provision is inherently calling for a legal conclusion.
If the representative would like to give his opinion on, he may.
In my view, these proceedings became very difficult to justify following the June order rescheduling everything. And I think the errors that have emanated since then have been sufficient to deny the application. However, I view with great respect the work that the board and the board members and the board staff do in examining the record, in conducting these hearings, and I do not presume to state that I've examined them at nearly the level they have. But I believe there are sufficient concerns on the record right now that override the details that have been presented and would justify the board's declining this in its entirety.
And you understand that would be consistent with what the Public Utility Commission did in South Dakota and what the Public Service Commission did on initial hearings in North Dakota?
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Ms. Coles?
Good morning, Representative Thomson. I've had a question. I've asked a lot of landowners if they knew, if someone had supplied to them the fact that the pipeline they were at risk, or it was a hazardous pipeline, and they indicated that Summit did not release that information. So I was wondering, do you think there's any way that those easements that have been signed could be considered valid, since they didn't give that information to the landowners?
Objection.
State the objection.
Well beyond the scope of the pre-filed written testimony and calls for legal conclusion.
Ms. Colas?
He was talking about the American rights that we are given under the Constitution relating to our land and private property. I think it's very valid. Whether we should have been notified, in fact, that we were not given that information with full knowledge, if that would be legal, if we would stand up.
Can you rephrase your question or ask it again? I'm trying to put all the pieces together here.
Since the landowners were not given the information pertaining to how at risk they were or how hazardous it was to the life of the individuals surrounding the pipeline, can those easements be considered valid?
Same objection.
And it reminded me the objection was that it was beyond the scope.
Both beyond the scope of the written testimony and calls for a legal conclusion on the validity of a legal document.
Okay.
Your Honor, might I weigh in on the objection?
Please do.
I think that perhaps since Mr. Thomson is here as a legislator and he has concerns about what goes into the process for considering a pipeline, he could weigh in on this question from a policy perspective instead of from a legal perspective as to what information should be considered.
It's still beyond, there's a lot of policy involved in a lot of decisions, but this is just not an area that was addressed in Mr. Thomson, or Representative Thomson, my apologies, testimony.
Hold on. Representative Thomson is a duly elected member of the Iowa General Assembly. He, perhaps more than anyone in this room, has the ability to weigh in on policy at the General Assembly. So, Ms. Colas, I'm sorry, that question is beyond scope.
Okay. I was just wondering, because when we transfer, we do warranty deeds and sign, and we have to disclose if it's hazardous or whatever when we transfer property. So that's why I wanted to know. Thank you. And we have to disclose that. And I don't think that was disclosed on the easements that the people signed.
Thank you. Are there further questions?
Representative Thomson, were you here for Mr. Fox's testimony from Charles City, the economic developer? Tim Fox.
Tim Fox, I'm familiar with Mr. Fox.
Were you here for his?
No, I was not.
Did you watch it online?
No, I read a summary.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You may, in a certain way, redirect yourself. So you may clarify any of the answers given from the questions asked today.
I have no further statement at this time.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming. Okay, back to Mr. Jorde and your witnesses. You can call your first witness.
Thank you. Lori Goff.
swear or affirm the testimony you are about to provide is true and accurate?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Thank you. Ma'am, can you please state your name?
Lori Goff.
And are you a trustee of the Lori L. Goff Revocable Trust
I am.
and a landowner in Dickinson County?
I am.
And you have 2 parcels that are presently being targeted by the proposed Summit carbon pipeline?
That's correct.
And is it true that you caused to be filed in this matter some pre-filed testimony along with attachments that you would like to be made exhibits in this matter?
I did.
And then also filed a exhibit 305, which are your notes of contacts with Summit, is that correct?
That's correct.
I would offer landowner exhibits 144 through 151 and Goff hearing exhibit 305.
Are there objections? Seeing no objections, the board will admit.
Thank you. Ma'am, do you have any corrections or updates to your testimony?
I do. The KMZ, if you could bring up the exhibit 1, I think in my initial pre-filed testimony, I'm not sure if I was very clear on the parcel and in describing it, because 5 years ago we sold off our acreage portion, so there's parts of it that's a little bit vague. So I wanted to just describe that when I said our land that wasn't affected, and then I talked about moving the line and everything, there was a lot of confusion over where exactly the pipeline was going. So when I received the Exhibit B information, I was confused when I looked at the original map, not understanding what portion that was, and in my description I didn't describe it correctly.
Okay, and you're referencing Exhibit B, which is attachment 1 to your pre-filed testimony, which is a document Summit provided you of their proposed easement and permanent and temporary workspace easement.
Correct.
That we see there.
So when I looked at this, I saw this was my first, when I got my first mailing, I saw this as being my entire quarter section. So I didn't understand that it was only one portion of that. And then there's the second part of B. So I took it as option 1 and option 2. I thought that they had 2 different proposed routes through, and there was nobody explaining anything. So I saw it as going the entire way from the southeast corner of my property to the northwest in the first one, or taking a small amount in the very southwest corner of the property.
Okay, so when you received what we're looking at here, just to clarify, you thought the box in the kind of the dashed black and white was your entire quarter section, but you've come to find out it's just a portion?
Correct.
Okay.
And so with that, I mean, even the legend on the map, I have no idea what ATWS is or what's even proposed.
Okay. In order for you to correct your testimony in that regard, would you have to look at the KMZ map, which would be the most up-to-date map?
Yes, and so now in seeing the whole thing together, I understand what the current proposed route is.
Okay, and so based on your now understanding being more clear, what correction, or do you have an additional correction to make, or is it related to a potential alternative route?
No, the only other, I mean, I would love an alternative route, but none has been offered to me. In listening to Summit's expert witness on Tuesday, September 12th, he indicated that pipeline integrity was not compromised with 90-degree angles in the pipe. And so my request would be to utilize the utility easements that are already in place. that's one thing I have. I also did have an update with the contact list regarding my contact with Summit and their representatives and the Iowa Utilities Board.
And that was Exhibit 305?
Yes.
Could we pull that up, please? Thank you. And what's the
So-
correction here?
Everything that is in bold is corrections. So I have, at the time when this whole process started, I had a 19-year-old son in college. He was the only contact that Summit had. They had my address because I was receiving mail, but they didn't have my phone number. They continued to call him and call him and call him, disrupting his school. They have supposedly left voicemails for me. They don't have my phone number. They have shown up at my house and tried to leave paperwork with my kids who are not landowners. I'm the landowner. It's just ripe with wrong contact. And according to my pre-filed testimony, I had to attest that what I was submitting was true and correct. Otherwise, I'm subject to perjury. Are they not subject to perjury?
Okay, and that's a rhetorical question in regards to all of the errors of what they've represented on Exhibit 305 that they represented as true that you are here telling us are in fact false.
Correct.
Okay. And others may have questions about that, but I guess I should ask, when you say have tried to leave things with your kids, what were the ages of your kids at the time?
21, or excuse me. Let's see, this was in, I have to look at my notes. It's in 22. So I had a 22 and a 24-year-old
Okay.
at the time.
Very good. And then your son, the 19-year-old?
So he was 19 when the calls first started.
Got it. Now he's 22.
Yep,
Okay.
at the time of this. Or 21 he would have been, I guess.
Very good. Okay. And anything else that you believe that needs to be corrected or updated?
No.
All right. Very good. With that, I tender Ms. Goff for cross-examination.
Mr. Taylor?
Good morning, I'm Wally Taylor, I represent the Sierra Club. It's my understanding this land has been in your family since 1918?
Correct. My dad made me promise to never sell the land. And I've made that promise with my kids as well. Everybody knows that this land is ours and that you don't sell it.
Can we bring the KMZ file up? I think it helps to have that to refer to. So who's farming the land now?
We've had a renter for over 30 years, the same renter. He is a non-Exhibit H neighbor. He has done extensive work for no-till. We live in a glacier area. We have hills on here that aren't even farmable. That not even with terracing can you farm them. I once watched my dad almost tip over on a tractor because trying to go up one of the hills. There's the grade where I look where this is going through, there is a culvert at the very south end of where it crosses. A very large culvert that lets the water from our property on the south end of the farm drain south of us to the neighbors and beyond.
So is that culvert under the highway or that road?
It's under the, yes, 130th Street there. It's in that area. That's a low area right there. And then where it exits onto Highway 71 up in the northwest corner, that grade is so steep over there, according to the soil maps, that grade is,
between 9 and 14%. You can see by looking at the map, there's waterway right by it. The hillside to the north of it is where you can't farm.
So what do you grow there, corn and beans?
Yes.
And you say you use no-till?
No-till. There's a lot of tile in the area as well. Most of the tile goes back. There's some that's been around for probably 15 years. A lot of it goes back probably 60 years or more.
Okay. Is the presence of the tile a concern you have regarding the pipeline?
Definitely, because unfortunately, my dad never thought that I would farm, so a lot of the information wasn't passed on. So I don't know where all the tile is in the property. I know that it's tiled in that area because of that culvert. In order to get that water off our land, it's tiled in that area.
Okay. Is any of your property designated as highly erodible land?
At one point in time, it was. Our renter tried working with because he thought it was to the detriment of the farm to have it be designated as highly erodible. So he worked with, I'm not sure what organization, if it was FSA or Soil and Water Conservation, I'm not sure who it was, but he did try working with them in order to keep it from that status. But I do have other, I'm not sure which exhibit it turns out to be on my pre-filed, but I have other documentation of what they called basins in that same area, of water basins that go through the same area that is proposed.
Okay. Well, are there any wetlands or that type of condition on your land?
No.
Is the land in any kind of government programs because of the hilly nature of it?
No, he is just, we just have it seeded to brome.
Well, brome is grass, so are there some grassed waterways?
Yes, there's several grass waterways out there. Right there where the exit is.
In the south?
On the northwest, on
Okay.
Highway 71, that's a
Okay.
grass waterway right by the driveway in that area, as well as that whole hillside on the north end of the property is, those grades are anywhere between 19 and 40%. So that north end of the property is where the most elevation change, slope change is.
It doesn't look like there are any buildings or residences in the area, is that correct?
There are not any structures in the proposed route. The farmstead to the east, directly east,
Okay.
is where we lived for 18 years, raising our kids. And in 2018, we sold that. As our kids graduated from high school, we sold that with the understanding that we have the right of first refusal should the people ever decide. Our kids were very young and not in farming at the time, nor did we think that they would be in farming, but we wanted them the opportunity to be able to move back to where they grew up, and they reserve that right. They want that. But if those people don't choose to move, then our second option was that where the driveway on the south side on 130th Street, we assumed that they could carve out a piece of the farm there and create a residence there, so should they choose to move back.
Now the driveway, is that the one
It's just to the west of the proposed route, that
The
tan
south end
space.
there.
Yes.
Okay, I think I see it. So people do live in that house,
People live in the house there, yes.
okay? Do you know how far that is from the pipeline?
I do not.
I think we can find out. $1,120
Okay.
feet, okay. In your written testimony, you kind of indicated that you've never been shown a final route, is that correct?
Well, that was what I was trying to say in the very beginning, was that my confusion over what the route was, I thought that I had two options. When I looked at the original maps, Exhibit B maps, I thought that I had either this route or this route, because the paperwork came and it said, this is how much we'll pay for this amount of feet, and this is how much we'll pay for this amount of feet, and I thought I had two options.
Okay. And had you ever seen the route that is shown on the KMZ?
Not altogether.
Okay. Did you talk to Summit land agents about, where the route actually was, and perhaps an alternative route?
I talked to, yeah, I did. I talked to the gentleman that showed up at my door about an alternative route, and I asked why the pipeline could not utilize the utility easements that are already in place. That my understanding is that's what they're there for.
And what was the response?
No, there was no consideration of that at all. This was the route.
Okay. Initially, you talked about your hearing Exhibit 305 about the contracts with the Summit agents. How many contacts did you actually have?
Myself, they were the in-person contacts only. I can say no more than 3.
But you said they tried to contact your son?
Yeah, repeatedly. He still has the voicemails on his phone. He has them saved. They contacted him several times, just repeatedly trying to talk to him. Then the way it's reported on here, it's reported that they contacted me when they were actually calling him.
Okay. And did he talk to the agents or try to deal with them?
He, at first, there's several calls that he said he took because he's a college kid. He didn't know if it was a fellow student or who was calling him. So at first he was answering all the phone calls that he was getting from numbers that he didn't recognize, but he doesn't have voicemails from those.
I think you said that you use no-till on your farm there. Does that present any particular challenges in regard to the pipeline being placed on the property?
Well, I know it took him close to 10 years in order to take it from the kind of farming that my dad did to the no-till option. It was a lot of time and effort that he had to put into doing that kind, and any disruption to it makes him, my understanding, he's going to have to start over in those areas, and that would be a significant inconvenience at the least.
And you mentioned the tiling in the area. How significant is the tiling?
All I know is that the southeast portion of that KMZ area is lower. It's lower than the house to the east. It's lower than the land to the west of it. I don't know how significant the tiling is.
Okay. Have you talked to your tenant about what the impact might be to the tile?
definitely. Yeah, he has helped us in every way. Since he's farmed the land for over 30 years, he treats the land like his own. And so he's the one that we discuss when we ask if there's any need for anything to happen. Do you need additional tiling? Are things the way they should be? Is it draining properly? What do you need to make it produce the way it should?
Where would the nearest emergency response team be if there were a rupture in the pipeline?
Well, Superior is 5.5 miles. It's an entirely volunteer fire department. It's from a town of less than 100 people, so they all work somewhere. The next biggest town is Spirit Lake. That's 8.5 miles. That also is a volunteer fire department.
Does that concern you?
Yes. My husband is a respiratory therapist as well, and I've listened my whole married life to what CO2 will do to your lungs. He's very impassioned about people just even not smoking, and that's nothing of CO2 concentration compared to what this would be with a rupture.
One final question, just to clarify. Initially, you had shown an exhibit that had a little bit of the pipeline on the corner of what you thought was a quarter section, but wasn't. So where does that show up on the KMZ?
So that's the north portion there with the, correct. I guess I should use that. So that is that north portion where when I looked at it on mine, there was nothing in the letter that was included with the easement that stated that it was this plus this equals this. It was, here's the paperwork, and I really took it as this is option 1 and this is option 2. I had no idea they were connected. And it took a long time for me to understand. I mean, I was well over a year and a half into the process before I realized that they were connected.
And somebody just never explained to you where the actual route was?
No. No.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Ms. Collins?
Good morning, Ms. Scott. I'm Jean Collis. I had a few questions. You mentioned that there was already an easement on your property. Where's that located?
I guess when I'm referring to the easement, I'm referring to the known electric easement that goes in the ditch. There is no signed easement with anyone.
Can you show me with a pointer where that is located on the KMZ map, please?
Well, considering that there is electricity here, it goes across the south edge of the property here, I would presume, because the poles used to go all the way across.
Okay. Are you concerned about the safety of the pipeline? You mentioned the high grade around there.
Definitely, because the part where it exits up there on the northwest corner going over 71, that portion is on a hillside, and we have waterways right by there to try to prevent erosion. So if you don't take away more land and plant it to more waterway, I'm not sure how you're going to keep it from eroding, because the no-till, by not moving the land, is the only thing that saved it so far.
Are you concerned about the resulting compaction if they build it?
Definitely, because they're again on the southeast southeast corner, if they were to do anything when it's the least bit wet, it's going to compact it horribly, because that tends to be a wetter area of the farm. It's not a wetland. It does drain, but it's definitely a heavy soil that will retain the moisture.
Has your tenant indicated concern about the loss of yield and the inconvenience if this pipeline is built?
Very much so. They have been huge advocates for me. I live in South Dakota now, so they live within 3 miles of the farm. They're there repeatedly. They're the only ones that have helped me through this process. They're the ones that explained to me as to how the map would go through the property. They have filed several objections with the utility board. They are advocates for me and for themselves, because they realize that if it goes through, I'm not going to just take whatever monies I'm given without compensating them. It's their production that's going to suffer, and so I'm going to have to take part of that and hand over to them. It's going to reduce my cash rent. It's going to reduce their production, not just off of the exact pipeline area, but all the area along there. It's going to affect them past when they're probably farming my land. He'll probably retire before anything would come back even remotely to this area.
With the diagonal of the pipeline, has he indicated concern about how much productivity he would lose farming or using his equipment?
I haven't discussed with him particularly how much it would be. He's a farmer. I let him keep his production closer to himself.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions.
Ms. Wright?
Thank you. Morning, Ms. Goff.
Morning.
In your testimony, you mentioned that your children have future plans relating to the property, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about that. First off, how many kids and how old are they?
I have 3 kids, so I have a 25-year-old and twins that are 23.
Okay. And was one or more of them planning on moving back?
One of them has discussed it. They were devastated when we moved, because it's home. So they had a hard time, and so one of my twins, the boy, has considered moving back to the area and has talked about it several times.
And he specifically wanted to live on your land, I assume?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, it wasn't just to move back to the area.
Was there a specific place on your land yet that he'd identified?
Well, the southwest corner, because of the proximity, we said there's a driveway there. It's a higher point. It's closer to the highway, so you have less gravel to have to drive on. That was just kind of the assumed area. I would never put them on the highway, and the other area is already taken by an acreage.
So there's already a driveway, and it would be accessible?
Correct. Yeah, it was a farm driveway that had been expanded upon.
Does it have an address?
The driveway?
Yeah, I mean,
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Are those plans going to be changing if the pipeline is built?
Oh, definitely. I would never let him move there. I would never let him. I'm afraid for the people who bought the acreage from us, because when we sold it to them, we had no idea that any of this was coming down the pipe. I wouldn't knowingly put someone in danger like that.
What kind of loss is that for you and your kids, for them to not be able to live there?
Well, considering our family history, it's a lot, because The farm isn't just the land that you harvest from. It is us as a family. It's where we go back to. I live a ways away, but I don't live that far. My mom lost her leg in a farming accident there. It's everything that I ever knew. I'm an only child. There were no boys to farm the land. It's devastating to me to think that someone can come on and tell me what they're going to do with my land. I don't understand the whole eminent domain thing. I really don't, because there's no public use for our county. There's no public use for our area. All we've done has been intimidated during this process. People telling you that they're going to take your land. People telling you that they're going to sue your neighbor because they won't let surveyors on. People telling you that they're going to sue the county commissioners because they're trying to stand up for rights. I don't understand who's protecting us in this process. I don't understand it. Besides having to hire an attorney with all the expenses that we have, nobody cares. They're taking the wealth from hundreds of individuals and transferring it to a company. And the IUB is the only one who can stop that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, I just have a couple of questions for clarification. You mentioned a couple of times the utility easements. By that, do you mean the road ditch?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the only one that I was referring to.
Okay. And you were suggesting that perhaps as an alternative route, you would suggest that Summit follow those road ditch easements?
Maybe not in the road ditch, but as close to the property line as possible to make it the least inconvenience for our farmers.
Okay. Are you aware whether road or highway authorities have restrictions on paralleling the road with large transmission lines like this within their easement?
Transmission lines of what?
Anything?
Nope, I'm not aware. So the electricity lines that parallel the roads, is that what you're asking about? I mean, I know that they do parallel the roads.
I'm asking if you know whether those road or highway authorities have restrictions on large diameter pipelines paralleling those roads.
Oh, no, I don't. No.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Member Burns?
Oh, let's see here. When, just out of curiosity, when is the last time that you had like a physical face-to-face conversation with anybody from Summit over this parcel?
His name was Lee Birmingham. He has been the South Dakota representative that's shown up at my house several times. That probably would have been sometime last summer, is my guess. I mean, I have on here 5/26 of in person. I'm guessing that was with Lee.
So summer 2023 or summer
22.
22, okay. And just for the record, I know you brought this up at the very beginning, but ATWS on
Yes.
that map, did you ever find out what that meant or not?
No, I don't know what it means.
So it does mean additional temporary workspace, just for the record.
The legend doesn't indicate that at all.
Right.
So I'm not sure how somebody is supposed to know that.
And so then, and I think you maybe just answered this, I'm just looking at the map here, but your alternative route proposal would be to basically hug the fence line more so than going diagonal to try to do the least amount of disruption. is what you're saying.
Exactly. That would be my my only choice, that if I had to have it,
Sure.
that would be the only way that I would prefer.
And just to be clear, had you shared that route idea?
I did. I
Okay.
talked with the representative that showed up at my door about that.
And I think Ms. Colas took my easement questions, so I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jorde?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Leonard for Summit asked you a question, and so I need to pick up on that. Assume a highway authority or whomever has jurisdiction over the roadways has some type of regulation that allows them to deny requests to kind of co-locate a hazardous pipeline with an existing utility. Do you think you as the landowner that your land is any less valuable, or you should have any less rights to exercise that same type of veto power?
Absolutely not. I mean, no, there's been no two-way communication with this whole process. And honestly, I feel, my son works for Northern Natural Gas, so I know a little bit about pipelines. And the frustrating part with me is to realize how back in the day when those pipelines were laid, they did farm taps. They tried to work with the landowner. They tried to make the landowner want the pipeline go through their property. I feel like everything with this has been shoved at us and nobody's looking out for us.
Can we go back to the KMZ, please? And while we're doing that, ma'am, you mentioned that on your farm it's no-till. Is that both parcels in red there that are
Yes,
no-till?
the entire farm is.
Okay, and you understand that one of the alleged, I guess, tangential benefits is potentially some type of reduction in carbon gases. Do you understand that no-till farming is an excellent way to reduce carbon intensity?
Definitely. I mean, I grew up on the farm, so I did a lot of rock picking and a lot of walking beans, and you're out there a lot more than what they have to be now, between not tilling the land, cultivating all the time, plowing it up. The tractors aren't out there. It's much better for the environment as it is.
So would you say you're already doing your part such that it were and to be environmentally conscious with your land?
Yes.
The road on the south of your southern parcel that we're looking at there, is that a specific name or number?
It's 130th Street.
So other than Mr. Leonard's suggestion that maybe there's some authority that might not prefer to have a hazardous pipeline near existing utility, has anyone from Summit told you why they couldn't simply go across the parcel to the south, cross the road, and then come north across the other road and then be in the property to the west?
No, no one has told me why they could not.
Are you aware if the parcel to the south that has the proposed pipeline indicated if those folks have signed an easement?
They have not.
Okay. And then what about the folks to the west of you? Do you know if they have?
Directly to the west, I don't believe that they have either. I know the next quarter has not, as well as for several miles. In fact, the pipeline doesn't even connect to anything because Minnesota doesn't have eminent domain.
Well,
And
yeah, can we just zoom out a little bit on this map? Because I wanted to ask you about that. So you're fairly north in the county, and then your county, Dickinson, is the northern border of Dickinson is the southern border of Minnesota.
correct.
And so are you saying that because Summit has no permit into Minnesota and doesn't have the power of eminent domain there, that you don't think they should even be targeting you at this time?
No, not at this time.
State your objection.
Beyond the scope of redirect, I don't know what in that cross-examination this redirect is intended to respond to.
Well, the reroute questions, the reroute, I mean, one type of a reroute is no route, and she's justifying why first a reroute is obviously feasible, and then why no route is really what should occur, right?
All of which could have been addressed in her direct testimony, and in fact, to the extent we're suggesting no route at all, it is addressed in her direct testimony.
Okay, well, the Minnesota piece I don't think was specifically addressed, and obviously if they can't get into Minnesota, there's no point to even be here with any of this. So is that the point you're trying to make?
Yes.
All right. And then you had referenced on your parcel, there already are, well, at least one 90-degree turn on the northern parcel proposed, and then other angular bends. So if, in fact, all of this ever came together, I just want to be clear that pushing the route as far to the west as possible, it would be preferred if this was to occur.
Correct. I mean, the gentleman to the west, obviously, by this map, looking at it, has signed an easement. I don't understand why my property, go where people want to. If people want to sign an easement, then put it on their land instead of forcing it on somebody else.
And again, no justification of why the angle cut across the southern parcel.
I'm assuming that it probably has to do with the low spot in that area, with the culvert, with the drainage in that area. That's my assumption. Because there again, I don't have, when I am there, I can't put an exact finger on exactly where this would be.
But no one has told you that.
No.
Okay. And you referenced that your tenant has filed several objections. I just want to make sure for the record we link together those objections with your testimony. What is your tenant's name?
That is William and Vicki Beck.
William and Vicki Beck. And are there also targeted landowners on land they independently own? Is that correct?
I don't believe it affects their land. It's adjacent to their land.
Okay.
It's on several farms that they cash rent.
Okay. Are you aware if they've been allowed to be an intervener in this matter? Is their status as a tenant?
I believe that they've been denied that ability to speak.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about the fact that there was this dream of a new potential home at the drive to the south of your southernmost property, but I believe your testimony was that you wouldn't allow any of your children to live within a few hundred feet of the pipeline if it was built. Is that correct?
Objection.
State the objection.
Asked and answered. That was Ms. Ryan's question. It was asked, it was answered.
Not the proximity to the pipeline, and that's what I wanted to get in there. Would you agree that if you located a home where you intended to before this project has been at least proposedly forced upon you, it would have been within a few hundred feet of the proposed route?
Correct.
And no plume model or risk analysis has been provided to you throughout this process?
No, it is not.
And it's fair to say you've and your family have invested hundreds of hours in getting up to speed on this matter?
Yes, I've actually attended more meetings in South Dakota than I have in Iowa, but I've stayed very active in it. I've contacted legislators, I've contacted the county commissioners, I've been speaking with everybody, and it feels very one-sided process. Even what happened this morning, I was supposed to testify last Thursday, and then we got cut off at 4:30. I had driven over 3.25 hours to be here, and granted, everybody's testimony goes longer than what you think, but people can't just pick up and come on the whim to learn on Wednesday that you might have to be there on Monday. It just doesn't seem a fair, equitable process.
And throughout all of those time sacrifices,